Good morning, Artesia Radio Show, and Hayley is here from the Artesia Chamber. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
It's kind of crazy. I have we've had a lot we've been doing with the video streaming and stuff like that. Like we have tonight. We have Artesia soccer. We have Artesia volleyball.
Yes.
We have Zia fall choir concert.
Cool.
We have Goddard volleyball and Roswell volleyball.
Super cool.
And I'll check, and NMMI may have something that they're going to throw up on the channel for tonight too. So we're trying to stay on top of all this stuff.
Well, it's super cool. I was just saying on the break that lots of parents and grandparents love it because their relatives in other places and other states can watch. It's so cool.
It's fun to see where the viewers are.
I heard you talking about that after the football game.
Yeah, we had a whole bunch of places. Guam showed up. There's somebody.
I have a feeling I might know who that is.
Okay. Well, that's cool. But we're glad to do it. And for the most part, this kind of happened over the weekend. There was one comment on the Friday night football broadcast, and I know when we make a mistake because we're not perfect,
Right.
we have challenges, and I'm fully aware, and we're trying to correct things and fix things when there's an issue. But for the most part, we get it pretty right. And Friday night was an example. I thought that was a pretty good broadcast.
Oh yeah.
It helped that the home team won.
Yes, it did.
Although we cover the other team, and so I have to be a little. No, I don't. I was going to say I have to be neutral, but then again, yeah, whatever. But
it was a great game.
It was a great game.
Very exciting.
And then we had somebody had some issues with the broadcast, and I reviewed it, and I went through, and I wrote them back and said, well, here's what I think you're looking at, and this is what we're doing, and this is why we do it this way, and we'll try to get better, but thanks for your comment. And I got a reply back, and they basically said my response was BS.
Oh.
I'm like, wait a minute. I actually thought about this response. I really did.
Oh.
So you can't make everybody happy, but most of the comments we get are very thankful for all the stuff that goes on.
We are very fortunate to have it. How many other, we were just talking about the 5th and 6th grade football being streamed and how cool that is. But I mean, even high school football, where else? I don't know. I just don't know how many places in the country high school football is something you can see every Friday night, even if you're not at the game.
I think there's more now because of COVID.
Yes, that probably can.
And the technology has kind of made it to where it's easier to try to do it. Mm-hmm. But the technology is like any new technology. They still have a few years to go before they get the software right.
Yeah, well, and technology is only one part of it. It's the human capital.
Yeah.
It just takes people and energy and commitment. It's, getting the same people out there every Friday night, is not easy.
No.
So
getting a good crew together.
Getting a crew together and getting people committed to give up their nights and weekends to do this.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. So I think it's really cool.
Well, we wanted you to come back this week, not because we don't like Jessica or Coxie. They're fine. But we started talking last week about the election and how important it is for people to get out and vote. And one of the things that we talked about was the constitutional amendments. And so I printed out, again, my sample ballot, and you've got a copy there. So this is my sample ballot. Yours may vary depending on exactly where you live. But,
right.
I think for people that live in Artesia, this is probably pretty close to what most people in Artesia are going to see.
We have different state representatives. But
okay.
Yeah.
But that's understood.
But
but there are 3 constitutional amendments on the back, and you don't always completely understand what it is that they're trying to do or trying not to do by just reading the language of the amendment on the ballot.
Right. So I did a little research. I'm certainly not an expert in any of this, but I dedicated the time to doing some reading about each one of them, which I would encourage other people to do, or listen here or talk to people who may know, because when you read those constitutional amendments, and I guess it's the same with the bonds, but really the constitutional amendments I feel are kind of a big deal. It's hard to know what in the world they're talking about just by that one paragraph if you haven't read about it and to understand both sides of the argument. I also could argue that the wording could be, you just need to be aware that the wording could be slanted one way or the other for a pro or a con, to encourage a pro or con vote. Do you know what I mean? And so I feel like people get in there thinking they're voting for governor, president, or whatever it is, and these things are here. What was it? You just, sometimes you don't even know that they were going to be on the ballot, so you kind of read through it, and some people probably just go through and vote no, just because. And I would imagine that some people also go through and just vote yes. Well, if it's on the ballot, it's probably okay.
Yeah.
And then some people will just read those few words and say, oh, well, we're helping the kids, so it must be okay. And you have to sort of dig into it just a little bit to see where they're going. So that's what I did. I just did some reading.
Well, let's start with one, and I'm just going to read it.
Okay.
This is so when you get your ballot, this is what it's going to say.
Okay.
And I'm not going to read it in Spanish.
Yeah.
You don't want
No,
me
I dare you.
No. Si propone Amander el Archulo. No,
you gotta work on rolling those R's.
I'm not capable of that. All right, here it is. Proposing an amendment to Article 12, Section 7 of the Constitution of New Mexico to provide for additional annual distributions of the Permanent School Fund for enhanced instruction for students at risk of failure, extending the school year, teacher compensation, and early childhood education, requiring congressional approval for distributions for early childhood education. So if I'm reading that, it sounds like the state thinks they need, that the permanent fund is there, and we have students that are at risk of failing in New Mexico. We want more time in the classroom, and we can't come up with enough money to pay our teachers. We've got the permanent fund here, and there's a lot of money in there, but we're prevented by the Constitution from tapping into that for these things. So that's why we're going to amend the Constitution. Is that that's what it sounds like, yeah. Okay.
And I suppose that's in essence what it is.
Okay.
So the questions I have are, well, I guess generally we have some limited understanding, at least, of what the permanent fund is, right? It was a fund established, I think, at the beginning of statehood to set aside reserves for the rainy day, right? It's your rainy day fund. The state takes, per the Constitution, takes 5% out that goes primarily to education. There are some other distributions that are allowed by the Constitution, but the biggest chunk of it is early childhood education and public education. It's a lot of money, and that's 5%.
That's already allowed now.
That is already allowed, and actually that amount, that percentage was increased, I think, back in, I think it was 2003. It went from 4.7 to 5%. So it's actually quite a bit of money. It's approaching $1 billion, just that 5% that is distributed annually mostly for education.
Okay.
I wrote down some numbers here. I think it's about, I think last year in 2020, maybe it was $850 million or something like that. A small percentage goes to some other funds that are allowed by the Constitution. And I didn't get into it's like 20 other items, and I didn't get into that. But the amount that goes to that is like 35,000 or 35 million, something like that. So it's small by comparison.
Okay. But already 5% of what's in the permanent fund comes out to go into the state budget.
Yes. And the biggest bulk of that goes to education. It funds education. Now, that permanent fund is funded by oil and gas. So it's royalties and leases. The money that the state collects off of that is what funds the permanent fund. So,
and that was a change that was made back in the 70s, that there were some legislators that said, let's really ramp this permanent fund up with some of this revenue from oil and gas.
I think a question you need to ask yourself is, the trajectory we are on now is working on the elimination of oil and gas. What funds the permanent fund when that money is gone?
Right.
So, and then you're taking 5% of what? So, just like your investments or, anything else that you do personally, the more money you have, the more money you make, essentially, right?
Because these permanent funds are invested.
They're all invested, right?
So there's interest that's earned on the permanent fund.
When you draw down on that permanent fund, of course, even if you're earning 6% on that or whatever the percentage is, 6% of less is less than if you had more money in there. So that's something that people need to think about. What is that permanent fund? Where did it come from? How's it funded? And what are you drawing down from?
Let me ask you this: in your research, did it indicate? Because you said, and I think correctly, it's the rainy day fund. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that's a bigger part of the debate. What defines a rainy day? Yeah.
That I don't know. I mean, I was really focusing on what's coming out of the permanent fund now and how much is coming out and what's projected to come out. That's not, education is funded in a lot of ways, and the permanent fund is just one of them. Mm-hmm. So there's other money there. The second question I had was, does more money necessarily help education? I mean, if you spend more, do you get better results? And I think it would be easy to say yes. I mean, that would be right. If you have more money, you're going to buy a better quality shirt or something like that. It's just, so you would think that by spending more money, you're going to get a better education system in New Mexico. But when I was sort of looking at where states rank in terms of quality of education, and also the other factor I noticed was a big measurement was safety of the children in education, and compared that to the money that each state is spending per student, I don't really see that correlates.
Okay.
So
meaning some states spend less per student and rank higher in education.
Yes.
Than, say, New Mexico, where whatever the compensation level is versus where we are compared to other states.
So there are lots of factors, and then we could sit down and debate those factors. They're just many, right? But I was sort of looking, okay, in 2003, we increased the distribution out of the permanent fund. But we've continued to drop in our rankings. So in 2016, we were 49th in the country in terms of quality of education, and now we're 51st. But in theory, we're spending more money. Not in theory, in reality, we're spending more money.
We have spent more money. We've increased a lot of things in a lot of areas.
Clearly, it wasn't just the value. It wasn't just the money that, if only we had more money, we would be doing better. So that doesn't really make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a question that I asked myself. Let's see. I was gonna look. I'm looking for what I found in some of the other states. New York spends a huge amount of money per student, but they don't rank very highly in education. And I can't find my note on that. I don't remember what the percent. I'll find it on the break. Utah was the lowest in terms of spending per student, but their ranking wasn't that low. And I have those numbers written down here somewhere, and I'll find them so we talk about them after the break.
But these are questions that you need to think about as you get ready to make a decision on that particular.
Yeah, and you don't have all that information when you're when you're looking at your ballot or when you're getting ready to color in your circles. And so, you still have the opportunity to think about that, but you have to spend, and it took me hours to sit down and read and find reliable sources, and all of that stuff. It takes a long time to dig through that. So that you just have to ask yourself, do you feel that it's okay to take more money out of that permanent fund and spend it on education? And if we spend it, are we going to spend it correctly? Are we going to spend it well and jump our rankings up?
And it doesn't say, like you said, the legislature had approved, I guess I don't know if it was a constitutional amendment then, but approved increasing the percentage. There's no percentage. There's no cap. There's no indication as to how much they plan on taking.
They are planning to increase it 1.25%. So
that's not on the amendment.
Yeah, well, that's what it says.
No,
yeah, but that's a good point. Yeah, that's another good point.
Sometimes maybe some people would support it if you said we're going to increase the percentage distributed from the permanent fund by 0.25% for XYZ, but that's not how the amendment is written.
The other thing to know is how it got on the ballot in the first place. So certain, the legislature can do a lot of things, but this, by a vote of the legislature, but this is one of those things that has to be voted on by the legislature and then goes to the voters. Placing this constitutional amendment on the ballot was approved on a party line vote.
Okay.
And if I hope I read this correctly, and maybe Representative Towns is out there listening.
Somewhere.
I think one Democrat voted against it.
Okay.
So party line with one Democrat voting with the Republicans. Does that mean anything to you? You decide. But it's nice to know that bit of information.
Right. How much of that is just party politics? The party in power is going to get this done regardless, and the party out of power is just going to vote against it, or is there a deeper meaning behind a strictly partisan vote?
Right.
Like that?
And do you have you decide on how you feel about the people who are representing you? Is that a value decision, or is it just party politics? But knowing that information makes a difference, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, here's my notes.
Okay.
New York spent the most by a lot, and their ranking they were number 11, but they spent on average probably $6,000 or $7,000 more per student than the next highest state, and they're 11th according to the information that I found. Utah was the lowest spending about half what New Mexico spends, and their quality ranking was 17. So
it's not all, and there's a lot of factors that are in that. Like New York, you have New York City. I'd be curious to see what New York's educational ranking would be if you took New York City out of the equation. Is the rest of the state as messed up as New York City is? Or does New York City, because of the cost of living and everything and what they have to pay teachers just to go into the schools in the Bronx, in New York City and so forth, how does that affect that? Whereas in New Mexico, I'm not really aware that we have, we have crime issues. Obviously, you talked about the safety of the students and all that, but it is kind of an interesting thing. We do need to take a break.
Let's take a break.
So we'll be back and talk more. Hayley is here from the chamber. We're talking about the constitutional amendments that are on your ballot when you go and vote, and how do you do your research and figure out all that good stuff. We'll be back with more in just